walk us through, a little bit of what you do, what games you've been involved with, and kind of how your role has evolved at Disney.
Yeah. So I oversee both our licensing and our published business. So we do about 12 games a year. 3 to 4 of those are licensed, or probably about 5 to 6 of those actually are licensed. The rest are published by us. We have a relatively small vertical development, internal development operation. We have 2 casual teams and 2 or 3 mid-core teams. 5 studios up and down the West Coast. And then we have Club Penguin in Canada. And outside of that, we work with a network of third-party game developers. We probably work with 5 to 6 game developers who we have multi-title deals with, who make games under our IP. So we publish about 2/3 of our slate. The rest we license with the bigger publishers in the space, folks like Kabam. And the like, that covers Disney IP, Star Wars, and Marvel. So it's really a sort of a gamut of consumers and all the way from kids to adults, all the way from super casual games to very, very core games.
So when you're starting off, looking at a game or a brand, I mean, what determines whether or not you guys decide to do it in-house, you decide to bring it to somebody else? Is it them approaching you? Do you guys have the idea, then ask someone like Kabam if they want to partner? Like, how does that process work?
It's sort of a combination of all those things. So we obviously have a lot of inbound interest from developers who have a specific game type, and they think this would be a really great match for one of our IPs. We do a lot of concept generation internally as well. So it's a combination of both. We've actually, we're sort of moving to a place where we're spinning out a concept team just to focus on concept generation, so that we can get sort of more ideas at the top of the funnel. Is something that we're investing kind of more time and resource into. But it's a combination of those things, but we're always looking to do things that are authentic to the story and the characters. We're not trying to do just a brand slap. I kind of have this theory that recently that there's 2 types of IP out there. There's IP that's very indicative of a certain type of gameplay. So, if you look at Cars, for example, and you say, well, what kind of game should we make for Cars? It's not going to be a match 3 game. It needs to be a racing game, right? Marvel, it's probably some kind of battle game. Star Wars, it's some kind of battle-oriented game. Then there's IP like Inside Out, for example, that, where you have great characters, very broad appeal, but it's what I call affinity IP, which is that people love the characters, but it's not really indicative of a certain play type. And so what we tried to do is say, okay, who's the audience for this game, and what kind of games do they like to play, and can we make a game where the IP and that style of gameplay work well together? So, the classic example for me is Frozen Freefall, where you don't come out of the movie theater singing "Let It Go" thinking, man, I really want to play a match 3 game about that, but the IP appealed to adult women. Adult women like to play match 3 games, and those 2 things sort of fit together really well and made a huge success for us. So that's how we look at it. Is it, what is the core fantasy in the IP that I want to play out after I've seen the movie or watched the TV show? And if there isn't a core, game mechanic that's suggested by the IP, then what is the audience? What kind of games do they like to play, and how do we find a good fit?
It's interesting that you mentioned this sort of like need to keep the experience authentic to the characters and the stories. Because obviously one of the great things about Disney is that, your starting point is all these characters and stories that people have such strong feelings about. Mm-hmm. Is that ever intimidating when you're looking at, something like Frozen, that is so popular and people love so much, and saying, okay, how do we make a game that, people will like and doesn't feel, that feels authentic and something that, we can get that same kind of response to? And how do you know when you get it right?
There's definitely a high bar. I mean, particularly when you're working with filmmakers who who created those characters. They spend. I mean, if an animated film, these filmmakers work for five to 7 years on these movies, and they are deeply invested in these characters and stories, and they want everything that they care about everything that comes out of the film, and they want it to be great. And there's sort of an expectation. There's an expectation, I think, in a good way, that you need to make something that rises to the level. And so, we work very closely with the filmmakers to try to understand, what is it, particularly with these animated films where, the movie changes so much in development that, you have to, you kind of have to look deeply into the project. It's not immediately obvious sort of in the first, in the beginning, like what you should do with the movie sometimes, because the story's changing so much. They're trying to find the characters. And you have to work with them very closely to understand sort of what's the heart of the film. We have a game that we're going to launch pretty soon. That's a Zootopia game, for example. And, we talked about, well, what kind of game should we make? And we talked about, well, do we want to go down the, kind of stayed match 3 route? And we decided no. And somebody said, what would be funny is if we made like a CSI crime game with Zootopia, because the movie is it's a buddy cop film, and they're solving crimes and mysteries, and it works really well with the hidden object genre. And the hidden object genre is one that allows us to do storytelling. And so I kind of look at that game and say, that game is sort of like Zootopia, the TV show, in the sense that it's serialized, and it's, we can keep, adding additional episodes. That's a great example of, a game that where we said, okay, what is this movie really about? And, maybe it's not the core, aspiration of film, but it's the story is about, and sort of this just leads itself to a procedural kind of format. And so we went that direction. And so every new film, or piece of IP, we're sitting down with the filmmakers trying to understand sort of what's the best way to embody this as gameplay, and how do we do it in a way that allows us to continue to deliver story. Because the other thing about these, especially these free-to-play games and games as services, they last for 3 years, 5 years. And so we can't make a game if there's not, an idea there that we can continue the storytelling for a really long time.
So do you think of these games as kind of an extension of the stories that are being told in the movies, or are they really their own thing?
It depends on the game. I mean, if they are derivative of the story, then yes, they have to be. We have to be. The film is always the canon that we reference, and then anything we do, can't violate that. It has to build off of that. Particularly when you talk about, we were talking earlier about Star Wars. Star Wars. One of the things that we all love about that property is that, there's a very defined timeline, a series of events, and you can't do anything that violates. You're not going to have, Darth Vader, during the prequel period, right? Prior to the creation of Darth Vader anyway. So you have to obey certain rules. And we have to work very closely with the filmmakers. Lucas has a whole story team that just does this. It's a whole team of people that just focus on the film, the story behind the film, the timeline of the universe, and then any brand extensions that are happening with it. But we do other games, like, for example, we just released this emoji game that we're seeing some really strong success with, where it's, Disney emojis. And that's not a story-driven game. It's more driven by sort of an art style and an aesthetic and social expression and that sort of thing. And so, in a game like that, we're less concerned about story, but we can't do things, even then, whatever we're doing with those characters in that game, even though they're highly stylized and, this is sort of a conceit that we made up, we have to respect, when we use their power-ups and those kind of things, those need to be true to who the character is.
So I want to take a step back for a minute and talk about the bigger picture of games at Disney. Aside from mobile, what does that look like? Maybe you can talk about, kind of what your strategy with VR is and some of these other platforms.
Yeah. So, we're taking I would say outside, our main focus right now, internally and through our direct effort is mobile. And the reason for that is that we see it as a strategic platform for the rest of the company. Mobile is it's the biggest entertainment platform on the planet Earth. And once you get outside of the United States, it is the platform period in many parts of the world. And so if you want to reach, people, particularly in emerging markets or not even, emerging markets, but relatively developed markets outside of, the sort of the US, Europe, and Japan, you're talking about mobile. Even in markets like Japan, you're going to reach more people on mobile than you are on television. So, games to us is a way to connect with our best guests on a daily basis, on a direct basis, every day for a long period of time, and to keep those people engaged in our network and, have that touch point for the company, not just for games. So, that's why we put so much focus on the mobile platform. In console, we've chosen to take a step back and really partner with licensing partners like EA, and on the Marvel side, we recently there was a big announcement around our partnership with Sony on Spider-Man. We have a strong partnership with Square Enix on Kingdom Hearts. The reality on the console is that, it's something like 10, 20 games make all the money, and it's more stark than the feature film business. It's a blockbuster tentpole business, and if you don't have the studios that can make those kind of games already, you're probably not going to. And so we've just realized that, we need to work with the top studios, and what we bring to the party is our IP and our story and our characters. And we work very closely with these guys, particularly EA, on EA's ambition for Battlefront is really that is the Star Wars game, and to always make that the definitive place to play Star Wars. And so we work very closely with them on storytelling and integration, and they have access to things that most people don't, from visibility into where Star Wars is going. And then in VR, it's a very new space. It's one we're very excited about. You've probably seen some announcements from us, particularly from the Lucasfilm side with ILM-X Labs. They just announced that they're releasing Trials of Tatooine, which is an experience that they made. They're focused on the very high end of VR. We're also, we're very interested in Daydream. We're very interested in, where mobile VR is going and these kind of mass platforms. And we think that there is an opportunity sort of at every segment of the market. It's easy to kind of look at the stuff at the, kind of the HTC Vive stuff and say, this is what we should be doing. It's all super cinematic, immersive, and we're going to do that kind of stuff. But we also want to do things that are more casual and accessible, because we think, particularly when it comes to kids, that, mobile VR is going to be the way that that most people experience VR for the first time. So we're looking at how do we participate in sort of all tiers, in the right way, in a very focused way. I mean, from a business perspective, the market has not, the economics around the market haven't developed yet. But we think that if we can do, a handful of really high quality, not necessarily super deep, super long hours and hours of entertainment, but if we can do things that are, fun, highly repeatable, and people want to play again and again, that those things can be brand deposits and hopefully, things that, get people excited about the platform. My biggest concern about VR is that there's so much demoware and so many sort of thin experiences that that are gimmicks that, I don't really want to do anything in that space unless it's something that I feel like this is a real game and it's not just something we threw together for the purposes of, making a statement or issuing a press release, but that it's something that, is meaningful.
Yeah, it's really easy to look at Star Wars and say, this is the perfect universe for virtual reality.
Mhm.
And then I think, like you mentioned, I think the casual games, sort of mobile VR, I think is a little bit harder to like find that balance of what works. I mean, do you feel that it's just going to depend on what the brand is? Do you think that there's just like a recipe that people haven't really figured out yet? I mean, it seems like there are some challenges there, and
Yeah, I mean, I was initially pretty, I guess, I wasn't skeptical about VR, but for the longest time, I just wasn't seeing anybody making games that I felt like, okay, I want to go strap this thing on my head and it's going to get sweaty and it's uncomfortable and I'm going to want to keep it on my head. And I think that, there are a handful of games that you're starting to see that are getting released that when you play them, you go, wow, this is this is a game that like I would play this, and this is better because it's VR. It's not just a gimmick. And we've got some stuff where we've been working on, some prototypes that we've been working on. For example, we have a theme park ride down at the parks called Toy Story Mania that is a 3D immersive ride where you're on a ride vehicle, you go through, and it's sort of like a carnival arcade where you're shooting at these targets, and we have a little experiment in the lab where we've taken that and done that in VR, and it's pretty engaging. And so, I actually think the stuff that works. So I actually think that everybody immediately goes to these very core experiences, like let's get a lightsaber and let's all go hit each other with lightsabers, and that's great stuff. And we've done that with Trials of Tatooine, and I'm sure we'll do more of that kind of thing. But, I'm interested. I actually think that VR, in my own experience, is more compelling when it's least compelling. It's most disappointing when people try to do these like epic scale, MMO scale kind of things because it's hard to move around in VR in a meaningful way. And it just really, it sets up this promise that it can't deliver. The more intimate experiences for me are the things that, and the things that are not trying to be, an hour of engagement, but they're trying to be, 5-10 minutes, that I can, where I play a game session, then I go, I want to play again and again. Those things to me are the most compelling. And so I think that as you see, some of the things that we do with the Disney characters that, are sort of in the, moving against the grain in terms of what most people are doing in VR, I think those things have almost the most potential to kind of make a statement on the platform. I think that one thing you hear a lot because, investors have really kind of, they're kind of moving on from mobile. They've gotten bored with mobile. There are a lot of people who want to say that mobile, apps are dead, mobile's dead. And I've been, and I don't believe that at all. I believe it's the biggest platform on the planet Earth. It would be as if we were here in the 1950s, and by the end of the decade we say, well, television's dead. That's not, so if you look at Pokemon Go, it's a real mobile game, right? And if you look at most mobile games on the platform, they're like clicky things, right? And they don't really, you've got a supercomputer in your pocket with GPS, with a camera, with accelerometer, with all this stuff, and we're not using any of that, right? We're just doing this. And so, I think we're actually getting to a place where people are fluent enough with the platform that you can use the platform to its fullest extent. And so I think that Pokemon Go is the beginning of the next generation of mobile games. Not all of those are going to be geolocation games, but it's using the phone in its fullest, and it's also leveraging the cloud. I mean, most mobile games, up until now have been very client based, right? And so it's using cloud and multiplayer. I mean, Clash Royale came out in February. And until February, people were saying that synchronous multiplayer, you can't do that. That doesn't make any money. And Supercell completely broke the seal on that. So I think that we're just seeing this, this idea of social multiplayer and leveraging the phone to its fullest kind of happening. And Pokemon Go is part of that. I also think that as a parent, I just love the way that it shows that, the other thing I feel is that there's been so much focus on midcore, right? And all the money went into midcore, and sort of everyone's attitude around things that are more casual or accessible has been, well, you can't make any money there. And I think Pokemon Go in part has been so successful because, what about all the people who don't want to play battle games, who want to, this game has brought in kids, adults. It's got, people, I was in the park this weekend playing Pokemon with my kids. There were 40 people in our small town of Monrovia that we ran into playing it. I mean, I think this is a phenomenon for many reasons, but one of them being that there's just so much pent-up demand for something new and different and accessible. And it just shows that there's such an underserved market here in many different ways. I mean, in addition to the fact that, what they're doing with geolocation and all those other things is like super innovative. We have so much IP now that, just put the power of putting our IP together is so valuable that we don't necessarily need to bring in third-party IP. The second thing is that, from a storytelling perspective and from a brand integrity perspective, we're really trying to focus on things that are, more true to the story. So we're doing less of those stylizations, but or those kind of mashups. But we will do, what we're doing with, the Disney emoji thing is a mashup. Infinity was a mashup. We'll continue to do that, but we have to be careful because when everything becomes a mashup, we get pitched on mashups like every 5 minutes. And if we did all of those, it would be really dilutive and you lose story context and all that other stuff. So it's a balance that we're trying to maintain. And we'll probably be selective there. I could see us doing maybe one a year, but probably no more than that because the majority of our portfolio wants to be, true to story, true to character, that kind of thing. The thing that I've realized in doing a lot of free to play games is, free to play. I started off being a free to play hater and, or at least not a fan. And I love free to play now, and both as a player and as a designer. And I think that, the reason is that, part of it is it keeps you really honest, and, if you make a game that people don't want to keep playing, you're not going to make any money in that game. And, in the olden days, somebody would, make, hours and hours and hours of content and people couldn't get past the first 30 minutes. And, the developer's attitude would be, well, that's okay. I already made my money. Right. And in free to play, what we're maniacal about is retention. And, for two, reasons. One is that, from a brand perspective, we want daily engagement with our guests, right? And if people aren't coming back, we don't have brand engagement. But then the second thing is that I can tell you right now, there is no game on the planet Earth that makes a lot of money with low retention. None. Right? You have to have high retention. And so we just focus on, when we go into geo beta, and when we optimize these games in the beginning, we look at monetization and stuff? Yeah, we do. But our real focus is on retention and just keeping guests coming back. And, we can tell if you got a game that people want to play again and again and again, you can figure out how to make money out of that game. But if you don't, then you've got no hope.
Thank you, Chris and Karissa.